This podcast is brought to you by DopaFast. Take control of your time and limit distractions on your smartphone with DopaFast today. And through that link in the description, you can get 66% off it right now. And then also you can get 10% off tasty and healthy Vite Ramen with offer code BrokenSilicon. And you can also use code BrokenSilicon at cdkeyoffer.com to get 25% off all Windows keys. And we'll talk about these sponsors more later. But for now, let's get on with the show. And welcome to Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. Although today I paused for a second because it'll probably be a bit less about gaming as usual with this guest who has been on many times before. And I'm always really excited to have you on for your level of expertise. I think this is actually the fourth time, but I do feel it would be good to introduce yourself right here at the start, not just to catch people up to your experience, but just to remind people to the scope of your experience and why we are digging into these maybe somewhat atypical subjects for the channel and why they would be so valuable to talk about with someone like you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. Good to speak with you again. You know, time has changed. You know, things have changed since we talked last. The semiconductors are on the front page every day, right? And so I think it's definitely worth the discussion. I've been in the semiconductor industry for 40 years now, and it's been a good run. I started semiwiki.com about 13 years ago just to get more conversation in the media about semiconductors. And today we have over 200,000 active members. So, you know, if you have a question, that's definitely a good place to get an answer. But during the day, I still work. I am in the semiconductor ecosystem. I do M&A. So I help companies get started, and then I help them with their exit. It's mainly IP, EDA, ASIC, you know, companies that all work with the foundries. So the foundries are still kind of the center of my universe.
You know, I'm about to say here, I feel like becomes a subject every single time we talk. I don't know the first time you came on, if it was 2019 or 2020, but, you know, we're already coming on 4 or 5 years since when you started, yeah. Or I think we talked a little before that when we started talking on podcasts. And that subject that comes up every time is how much more prevalent semiconductors are in the normal zeitgeist, just regular conversation. I feel like every time you come on, it becomes more laughable that we talk about. You wanted to get people to talk about them more because now, like, commonplace terms that no one used to say before are just in the news all the time. I wonder how weird that is for you for it to become, I feel like, and maybe you disagree, I don't know, but like commonplace for people to be talking about the latest nanometer at TSMC, you know, why an iPhone, like half the time a mainstream news site, especially like the financial ones, may get half the details wrong, but they're trying, and they really weren't before.
Yeah. Yeah, semiconductors get a lot of clicks, but, you know, it's a complicated industry. It really is. And most of the people I work with have master's degrees and PhDs and, you know, 20, 30 years experience. And so, you know, it just takes a huge amount of knowledge, and translating that knowledge to the masses, you know, in a proper language is a difficult thing to do, even for experienced people. So, but now it's becoming much easier. Everybody knows what a semiconductor is, and some of the challenges we face are really front page news where they used to be kind of secret.
I'm curious, is there anything, I think this is a question I probably ask every time too, but in the recent year or so that you see said a lot on mainstream news that is just completely wrong, that they just keep getting wrong or misunderstanding about how semiconductors work, that is one of those things you go, no, why do you keep saying that? And you point at the TV or something.
Yeah. You know, the funniest thing I hear is Apple is stealing, you know, foundry capacity from everybody or something like that. You know, it's somebody's stealing 3 nanometer, you know, from other people. And, you know, the funny thing is that it takes 2 to 3 years to develop a semiconductor. I mean, it takes a long time. And so, you know, Nvidia guys today are getting PDKs, and PDK is the process design kit that you download from the foundry to start your design. And, you know, they're downloading PDKs for chips that won't be out for 2 or 3 or maybe 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And so, Blackwell is in the front page recently. I go to all the conferences. Since I'm a media star, they let me in for free, which is very nice because it costs a lot of money to go to these conferences. But I was at GTC, and I've been to maybe a dozen conferences this year, and I've never seen anything like GTC before. I go every year, but this year it was just nuts. It was like a rock concert, it was just huge and crazy. And, they brought out Blackwell, and they said, oh, yeah, the latest and greatest, but it is on an older node, and it's on TSMC TSMC N4, 4 nanometer. But what they don't realize is, it took 3 years. And, 3 years ago, the only PDK was TSMC 4 nanometer. So, they say, oh, they didn't want to use 3 nanometer because it didn't have enough capacity or anything, but it just wasn't available. So, just remember, it takes a long time to develop these semiconductors.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because that was actually one of the first subjects we were going to get to. Now, I suppose you can choose to believe me or not, but this was something where I don't think I ever really doubled down on the node last year. I think I assumed at least some of it would be 3 nanometer, but I was told, I don't know, a month or two ago by somebody at Nvidia that, make no mistake, we were planning to use 3 nanometer for Blackwell. And this is someone that insisted. He said he saw it. He saw that was I forgot the official term for what it is. It's like something in progress, whatever. But that even he works, well, I won't say where he works in Nvidia, but maybe not directly on Blackwell. So it would make sense why maybe he would have thought that, but at least he saw some roadmaps that showed that. Now, maybe those are very old, but I am curious what you think about Nvidia going with 4 nanometer on Blackwell, because my reading between the lines is they just want to make, and this is Nvidia's motto, I believe, for the past 5 years that's made them so successful. Half of the reason is they want it to come out on time. They want it to do what it needs to do, and they don't want to get caught up doing things that will delay their products, especially when it comes to AI, because right now, whoever's first just makes the money in AI. Yeah. So I think that's a major reason they would have gone with 4 nanometer with all of Blackwell. But also, I don't know. This last part here is speculation, but it's like, I know that they're trying to get out Rubin as quickly as possible, which may sound like I'm saying nothing. Of course they are, but like really, really trying to get that one out sooner than people expect. And I think if you have Blackwell out, they were still selling A100, for a long time, well into Hopper coming out. So I can't help but think that like launching all of Blackwell, especially gaming Blackwell on 4 nanometer, when Rubin drops first half of next year or mid next year, boom. That thing is ready to go. No one's competing. Well, less people are competing with them on 3 nanometer capacity. They can just be happy to sell gamers 4 nanometer, happy to sell professional 3 nanometer with Rubin. I'm wondering what you think about that.
Well, 3 nanometer was delayed a bit. So I definitely believe that it could have been on roadmaps, but I believe the official word is it was delayed 6 months or something. But there was a delay. And the reason why is EUV. TSMC just took a much deeper look at EUV, and the first version of 3 nanometer had too many EUV layers. So what they did was they trimmed it down, and they delayed it and trimmed it down. So the 3 nanometer that you're going to see coming out will have less EUV layers, and it'll be higher volume and higher yield and such. So there was a mistake made, and it happens. But I think it was only 6 months or so. But, when that started, the natural reaction for these people is to say, hey, let's use 4. It's safe. I don't know what's going to happen to 3. And so, the best laid plans don't always work out. But, the thing with Nvidia and some of the other big companies is Apple, they prepay, so they are guaranteed access and capacity and delivery. And so, if the 3 nanometer is available, they're going to get it. But, it's a risk thing. And, TSMC is the lowest risk foundry, but they do, sometimes get delayed, and 3 nanometer was delayed. So I think that's what the real reason is.
And here's a weird thing I'm noticing, and it could all be coincidence, and I don't want to get too ahead of myself here because I recently put out like a early Zen 7 thing video, like talking about what I'm hearing so far. It's still very early. This thing's years away, so there's only so much you really can know. But I don't want to get ahead of what maybe a follow-up video will go into until I've dotted all of the I's on what I'm hearing on it. But I'm starting to notice this interesting thing where like you see Nvidia, everyone basically using 4 nanometer for most things right now. And I'm starting to hear like a lot of the things AMD was going to put on 3 is on 4, and some of the stuff coming after Zen 5, more of it might use 2 nanometer than expected. I'm almost noticing this truncating of the market where obviously some people are using 3 nanometer, Apple's going to keep using it, but I'm also noticing some people, like especially AMD, I'm hearing seemingly choosing to put everything on 4 or 2 nanometer with a few things on 3. I'm wondering if that's something that makes sense to you, because everyone's using all 3 of those nodes, but I do feel like some companies are almost, they're not skipping 3 nanometer. It's not what I'm saying. They definitely seem to be putting more emphasis on 2 nanometer right now than I think they were expecting to last year, and moving some things back to 4, almost like they're going around 3 nanometer.
Well, I'm not sure if that's the case, but Apple last year announced products on 3 and 4 nanometer, which was the first time I've seen that. And I worked with Apple in the early days. I've been following them close. I'm an Apple fan. But yeah, some of the products are on 4 nanometer, and then the highest price product is on 3 nanometer. I don't think you'll see that this year. But, again, 3 nanometer had an issue. So that's how Apple addressed it. They had two separate products. It's not going to be the fact this year. 3 nanometers is going to be the biggest node in the history of TSMC. I mean, it's just no doubt about it. I track design wins, and it's just off the charts. Even Intel is using 3 nanometer, right? And that's going to make it even bigger because TSMC's never really had Intel as that big of a customer. And so you're going to see 3 nanometer. I actually thought people would skip 2 nanometer, to be honest with you.
Well, I did too. That's why I bring this up, and I'm surprised I'm starting to hear behind the scenes more go for 4 and 2. Almost like, it kind of sounds like 2 nanometers going well then as well, just from what I'm hearing.
The big change at TSMC, and this was very apparent at the symposium, is that, Intel's getting a lot of talking points. They're in the press every day, and the new Intel CEO, I met the guy, great guy, very, personal, very, very passionate. But it really has lit a fire under TSMC. So 2 nanometer has changed somewhat. I think it was going to be more of a stopgap node because we're introducing a new device. We're introducing ribbon FETs, gate all around, and that's a different type of design style. And the same thing happened when we introduced FinFETs 10 or so years ago. It's harder to design to, and the ecosystem has to learn how to design to these things. But as it turns out, it's not that hard to design to. So TSMC announced a family of 2 nanometer. So now there's just not one, there's going to be a whole family, and it's going to be similar to 3 nanometer, where there's, 3, 3E, 3P, 3X, it's going to be a long node. And so they're going to do the same thing with 2 nanometer. And I think that's one of the reasons why people are going to go to 2 faster. One of the things they said at the TSMC symposium is that 2 nanometer has more design wins than 3 nanometer at this point in time. And that's kind of shocking because 3 nanometer was off the charts. So, in fact, one guy told me, he said, only one customer that's using 3 nanometer is not using 2 nanometer. And that's Intel. So everybody else is going to 2.
But that's again, this is probably a development I've heard in the past couple months. And it's just interesting how I would have expected everyone to double down on 3. But again, I'm kind of repeating myself here, but it's like, no, I'm hearing like 2 nanometer is going to be a big deal with Zen 6, bigger than I think people expected. Whereas when we see Zen 5, it's mostly going to be 4 nanometer, even though they were kind of hoping for 3. But you brought up Intel, so I really do have to switch gears to that. So Chris Risch writes in, and he says, many of Intel's consumer products coming out in the next year will be manufactured by TSMC. Do you think that will help Intel's profit margins or hurt them? If you think it will hurt Intel's profit margins, then would Intel even be able to respond to an AMD price war? AMD will mostly be using the cheaper 4 nanometer process for now, but Intel will be using a faster and more efficient 3 nanometer. Well, I think they're using like the base 3 nanometer. So I don't know that it's better, but I don't think it's like a whole node better. It says, who do you think made the right choice?
So, another thing we should talk about is chiplets, because Intel is using chiplets for their new products. And so these chiplets are manufactured, some are at TSMC and some are at Intel. And what I think you're going to see is Intel is going to make the CPU chiplets because Intel has a faster process than TSMC. I mean, that's just the way it is. And, you can show all these specs and benchmarks, but, I know the people who are designing these chips, and it is faster. And Intel 18A is going to be a little bit faster than TSMC 2 nanometer. What TSMC has is much lower cost than Intel. So I don't think Intel's losing money doing business with TSMC.
No.
but they also have lower power. And power is critical now. And I would say it's even more important than performance because, we're putting these devices in these warehouses, in these, big server farms, and powering them and keeping them cool is a big issue. So TSMC's got density, TSMC's got lower power. If you look at the chiplets, you're going to do the high performance one for CPUs or GPUs, and then you're going to fill out the rest of the chip with the lower power, lower cost chiplets. And so, in one of Intel's products that Intel showed us, it had all TSMC chiplets except for the CPU. So it had a TSMC SoC, the supporting roles.
Yeah, I think Lunar Lake may be all TSMC.
Is that a GPU or a CPU?
Lunar Lake's like a low-powered, like kind of almost tablet, thin, premium,
that's
kind of thing, Tiger Lake.
TSMC.
Yeah, I think it's got like 4 chiplets, and from what I've seen so far, it seems all TSMC for that one. Although it's not like Arrow Lake, where it's for most of their lineup. It's like the bottom of the lineup.
Yeah, the thing is that the relationship with TSMC, the big one between Intel and TSMC, was inked by the previous CEO. So right before he was fired, he signed this agreement. So Pat Gelsinger is not really a fan of this agreement, and he thinks they should be doing all their own chips. But he said outright that the design groups can choose, and but maybe he's going to have a little influence on that choice. Like in China, if you can choose, right, but you better choose Chinese products. So.
Well, yeah. What was one thing that I heard? This is like a year ago, but I was hearing about the development of like Sierra Forest, and there was like a big fanfare that they finally did choose, I believe, to use Intel for at least some of those nodes. So that's kind of a specific example of something you're talking about here. But I want to drill in on this though, because here's my concern with Intel in client right now, like especially short term, is we see AMD launching Zen 5 in 2-3 months. It's all for I think besides the 192 core dense EPYC thing, it's all 4 nanometer. And it seems like it will at least be competitive performance wise with Arrow Lake. But Arrow Lake, is using a more expensive node and using a more expensive node that's coming out later. I can't help but wonder, and it's funny you bring up that the previous CEO bought that capacity, because I just get this suspicion that CEO bought this capacity in case they needed it and because they thought they would. And now Intel Foundries is catching up, but now Intel has to use this capacity. And I think, I'm sure this is always the case with these contracts, but I really get the feeling that when they signed the contract for 6 nanometer for their Alchemist graphics cards, that TSMC was very mad that it didn't come out on time, and that they're never going to let them get away with that again. So whatever contracts they've signed, even if Battle Mage is pretty much canceled, they're going to say, hey, guess what though? You're making it. You bought the wafers. You got to use these wafers. And I can't help but wonder if that's the reason they are still using the expensive 3 nanometer node for Arrow Lake, especially because it seems like they're using the base node, not the improved node as well, which makes me think it's 25% better than 4 nanometer, but costs substantially more. And if they had the foresight to wait for the better, more finished version of it, it may have been a more cost-effective upgrade in silicon.
Yeah, the reason why they signed the agreement, we know now, but it's because TSMC manufacturing and TSMC design, they were 2 separate silos, and they really weren't getting along. And manufacturing, was not doing a great job back then. And the new CEO inherited the Intel 10 nanometer debacle. It was horrible. Mm-hmm. And so the contract was an incentive for the manufacturing people to move in and get things done, because they really didn't have that motivation back then. Now they have motivation of, hey, if we don't manufacture properly and if we don't set expectations and meet those expectations, these guys are going to go to the foundries. I think it was a brilliant move. What better to motivate people in manufacturing to say, hey, we have another choice. And so, but I don't think Pat Gelsinger, he's old world Intel. I think he has a different view of things. I think he will move everything back inside Intel. But it's nice to have the alternative. And Intel prepaid. So I don't know intimate details, but I've been told that it was a pretty big prepay. So they got to use it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's my impression as well. And I know that happens all the time, but again, I feel like, especially after Alchemist, TSMC is like, you're paying ahead of time, man. We're not. It's your problem to make it work, not ours.
Yes, and I think they're the second largest customer now for TSMC, or they will be with 3nm, because Intel has been buying buying wafers from TSMC for many years. They bought Altera. Altera was at TSMC. They bought Mobileye. They bought a bunch of things. And so they've been doing business with TSMC for years. And I think 20% of Intel silicon was TSMC. I think now it's going to be more than 50%, which, it's kind of embarrassing, right? When more than half of your wafers are from outside. And that's the whole thing with the Intel Foundry. And I don't know if you have heard, but the Intel Foundry has a new leader. So Stuart Penn is gone. And there's a new fellow from IBM. I actually know him. He's from IBM, and it was Global Foundries because they bought IBM, and then he was at Marvell because they bought the Global Foundries ASIC business. But, Pat is really serious about this foundry business. And, he says he's all in and stuff. I think he is. I think the company is all in on, separating manufacturing, and I think it's going to happen. But, there's a lot of changes going on.
This piece of content is brought to you by DopaFast. What's the true cost of your screen time? I'm not talking about just in raw minutes. I'm talking about the full cost. Add it up. The time you lost remembering what you should have been doing after you stopped looking at your screen. The time lost getting back on track after you used your screen in the middle of a task you were supposed to do on that screen, but then used the wrong app. The time lost being preoccupied by something you saw online that you didn't intend or need to see, and now it's just taking up your brain space. All of this can change for you, though, if you try out DopaFast. It allows you to take control with sessions that gate app restrictions based on the chosen mode. The normal mode allows you to snooze or cancel the session at any time, and the hard mode prevents you from snoozing or ending the session, so apps stay blocked if you're willing to commit to it. And you can enjoy unlimited detox session modes, create your own personalized focus sessions, and customize days and hours for each blocked group of ads of your choosing. You can also set up focus times, set up screen time rules that work for you to stay fully concentrated and reach your goals 3.5 times faster, and you can replace doom scrolling with personal growth, increase your productivity, and boost your mental health, and track your progress to improve your motivation, prove that you are growing as a person as it's being charted, and just get on track to becoming the best version of yourself. If you're interested, click on the link in the description to check out DopaFast on the Apple App Store, and know that if you do download it through that link, you are helping Moore's Law is Dead. So support Moore's Law is Dead by checking out DopaFast through that link below today. Yeah, it's interesting. I really get the impression that there is a chance in the next, 10 years that we could start, and I think many people already are, or are preparing themselves to, I should say, look at Intel as more of a foundry company than as a, in-house design company. And I think a lot of what Pat's doing right now is he realizes that they have so much competition from AMD, let alone Nvidia, and that the one thing they do have is foundries, and the one insurance policy they have is they can hopefully always be a foundry company. Would you agree that they are positioning themselves to maybe be foundry first, not design first, if they need to be?
I doubt it, because Pat is, old school Intel. The thing is to compete with TSMC, you need economies of scale. They have to make a lot of wafers, right? And if you look at the business they're in, and this goes for AMD as well, is a lot of companies are making their own wafers. Making their own chips. So, like Google and Facebook and Amazon and all those guys. When I started in the semiconductor industry 40 years ago, systems companies had their own fabs and made their own chips. There was no IDMs like Intel, and there was no foundries and fabless. They made their own chips. And my first job was a fab in Silicon Valley for a computer company, and we were making CPUs. So now it's going full circle. Systems companies are like Apple started it, are making their own chips. And that's going to take away from the merchant chip companies like AMD and Intel. They're going to be losing market share for sure. Because, and we see this on SemiWiki, we see who's looking at IP and EDA, and, all the car companies are looking at making their own chips because of the shortages. This is really part of the shortage issue, pandemic issue. They couldn't get chips, so now they're going to control their own silicon. And, Apple showed us how. Google makes their own chips. Tesla makes their own chips. It's going big. And in the data center market, those companies, I've done projects with some of these companies, Google, and they design differently because they're not going to sell their chips, right? They're going to use them internally, and they're going to make billions and trillions of dollars on them. So they don't cut corners like some of the traditional fabless companies when they design. They buy all sorts of tools, and they have huge amount of compute resources, right? I mean, I know guys who have moved over to the data center places, Google and Facebook and such, and they have no want for computers. It used to be, okay, well, I can do 5 simulations because I only have 10 computers to use. Now it's like, hey, I can do as many simulations as I want. And so the silicon they're going to get and the designs they're going to get from, big budget design business are going to be better. And so these chips, maybe not today, but soon, they will be better than what Intel or AMD can provide. And so that's a problem. And, when your market is not growing as what you're used to, like Intel, you have to, change up your business strategy. And opening up the foundries is a way to do that. If you do chips for a lot of people, you can do them, cheaper, and, you can be more competitive. So I think that's what's going on.
Well, when I speak to people all over, tons of different companies, like a lot of them show a lot of apprehension to having their chips made at Intel, though. Like a crazy example, right, is I talked to some people at Nvidia about doing that, and they basically said, sure, just tell them to kill AXG first, so we're not worried about them stealing our information. We'd love to make a GPU tile for Panther Lake, but we need to know they're not going to steal our stuff if we do that. So that's a long ways away from now. I still feel like there's a bit of a chicken and an egg problem here with Intel, where they have the foundries, they're saying we're separate silos and we're open for business, but at the end of the day, unless they can become like 30% better than TSMC, I think that's what it would take, because TSMC has a proven track record. You go to them, I'll take a performance hit if it means I know this thing will launch on time without issues and I can trust them. And until they get a bunch of customers to prove you can trust Intel, customers will keep going to TSMC. And so then they'll keep going to TSMC. And so I wonder, I don't know how Intel gets out of this trap of both people knowing that TSMC is proven, but also knowing that they can trust them because TSMC doesn't make their own chips.
Right. Yeah, the big problem with TSMC is, geographical, right? They're on an island far away and they have threats. But, the same thing with Samsung. I think I would be safer in Taiwan than South Korea because, North Korea just seems nuts. And, maybe China has a little more rationale. But, there's two kinds of foundry business right now. There's TSMC business and not TSMC business. So there are people that don't want everything at TSMC. And so they've been putting their business over at Samsung, which, by the way, Samsung, got sued by Apple and many companies for stealing IP. So, it's a real issue. But now the companies are going to Intel instead of Samsung. So I think Intel will get some business, but it's going to be the not TSMC business. What the other business they need to get is I'm competitive with TSMC business, right? And we have not seen that yet, but it could be coming. The thing is chiplets are really going to change the foundry business because you can get chiplets from different companies and put them together. So you don't have to go to TSMC, but you don't necessarily have to risk your whole chip, right? You can have parallel chiplet designs very easy at 2 different foundries, but doing whole chips, you can't have parallel chip designs at whole foundries because it takes up your whole company. So you can second and third source in the foundry business again. We used to do this years ago. I worked on a Qualcomm chip at 40 nanometer that actually was manufactured at 4 different foundries at the same time. You can't do that anymore. The technology is different and the NDAs are huge, but chiplets are going to change that. And Intel, if they have a performance advantage, they could get a chiplet from Nvidia. You never know. But the day that Intel is able to do a complex SoC like with Qualcomm or Apple is still a little ways away. Intel's doing chiplets internally. That's great, but it's not a full chip, and there's a big difference. Different tools, different everything. So with the chiplets, I think Intel will be able to announce a lot of customers, but they will be chiplet customers, and you might not be able to pay the mortgage, on chiplet customers.
Right. And I'm glad you said pay the mortgage, because the next thing I want to bring up is just Intel's like kind of financial situation here, because a big concern that I have too is like I can see on paper the argument for Intel's bright future. The problem I have is I'm concerned they're able to even get there right now, because I still think it's going to be years before they have a ton of customers. And we're not in that situation where, I mean, we talked about this multiple times on Broken Silicon episodes back during the pandemic. Like, you had just every earnings call at Intel was just, we can't make enough 14 nanometer. How a different world we're living in now, where we're not really talking about it that much anymore. And on top of that, we don't have as many shortages. Like, there is capacity available. And I feel like as long as there is some reasonable capacity available at TSMC, that means that Intel's in a huge problem here to get to a place where they can catch up before, frankly, they run out of money. Like QH Freddy writes in and says, why are Intel Foundry costs so high? Where do you think the money is being burned? I mean, IFS, I mean, there's a lot of articles I've read recently, like from IFS's recent reportings, that suggest that like cost them twice as much to make a wafer as TSMC. So how do they get to catching up to TSMC before they run out of money? And again, we're not in a shortages world, or at least not the one we had before. So if people have a choice, they can probably buy some capacity from TSMC. And if they go to Intel, it's going to cost more.
Yeah. Well, part of it, as I said, is economies of scale. And, nobody can build a fab cheaper than TSMC, and nobody can make wafers cheaper because they make so many, right? And they are risk adverse per se. Is they're not the fastest, and that's not necessarily their goal. The goal is to get meet their customers' requirements in the shortest amount of time and maintain a 50 to 60% margin. So Intel has to think that way, and that's just not the way IDMs think, right? The old Intel just make huge amounts of money on these chips, so yield wasn't a big deal. But Intel has to learn to be a foundry, and that means yield. That means building fabs cost effectively, and Pat is a master at this. He raised a huge amount of money. I mean, they just announced another deal with another financial institution to pay for the fab, and $8 billion for the fab in Israel or Ireland. And, on one hand, I'm worried that they're, hedging their bets, or they're mortgaging their future with these financial folks, because it can't be cheaper to pay for it yourself. I mean, it can't be cheaper to get money from other people than to use it, your own money. And TSMC has said that on several occasions. But, I guess Intel is worried about not having enough cash. So they're looking at multiple, avenues to get this cash, and they're spinning out Altera, Mobileye. They're doing a lot of things. So, I'm not worried about Pat running out of cash, in the next 5 years, but maybe mortgaging their future, that might be a concern. I'm not a financial guy, so I don't understand the terms of these deals, but it would be a concern to me. But I don't think they're going to have any short-term issues. They have the CHIPS Act money. They're getting money from all over the place now. People are begging them to build fabs, but they're doing the same to TSMC and other companies. But, the thing is with the foundry, it's a marathon, right? And I don't know if these financial people get that, because, Intel's going to announce all these new customers, right? And I can tell you 18A is very active, a lot of test chips, but not necessarily design wins. So I don't think 18A is going to be a money maker for Intel. But it's kind of a test node where everybody's going to say, hey, can you do this? Can you do what you say you're going to do, right? Which is how TSMC has trained them. And if the answer is yes, I think 14A with Intel will be a successful foundry node. But again, they're going to have to do full chips, to get the big business, and they're going to have to do it at a good yield, and a low cost. Because I don't care where your wafers are made, people will not pay more for a wafer. If somebody said TSMC was going to charge more for the U.S. wafers, and they're not, that's dumb. Because if you said, hey, you want a Taiwan wafer for 20% less than a U.S. wafer, I mean, we're gonna choose the cheaper wafer. That's the way it is in this business.
Well, and the TSMC fabs in the United States won't be as much cheaper, because they're, I guess, going to charge more for the wafers that come out of their new foundries being built in Arizona and such. But I did want to bring that up, because this is something that I've been starting to point out, is that Yes, the US government has promised Intel chips money, but they've also announced a bunch of it for Samsung and TSMC as well. And from what I'm hearing behind the scenes, Intel's promised money, but they're not just, it's not like the US government just showed up and said, here is 50 billion or 20, whatever it was, $25 billion in a bank account. It's there, use it for whatever you want. They're promising the money upon delivering on what they're paying for. And that Intel has a cash flow issue right now. And they haven't really received that much funding yet, is what I'm hearing. Whereas the US government is also starting to fund Samsung and TSMC. So as I watch TSMC and Samsung combined, I don't know what it's at now, like 16 billion. Intel's promised 25 billion. In a year from now, are we going to see that the US government's funding Intel's competitors as much as it's funding Intel? And if it is, well, their wafers cost more. Again, this is where I go, yeah, I think they're mortgaging their future. I think they are betting everything on whatever, but they're not getting the money until they're done, and their competitors are getting funded as much. So if they're behind, aren't they just treading water? Are they really gaining if their competitors are getting funding from the US government to build in the US anyways?
I spent a lot of time on the CHIPS Act money. The government actually hired some of the semiconductor guys to go work on that. So I know a few people over there. The money is really in different phases, and they do get cash. They get a big lump of cash. I think it's $8 billion. The rest of it is tax savings and this and that, and reduce this and so. But they do get a lump of cash, and I think Intel got 8, and TSMC and Samsung got 6. And so, the government is.
But do you see my point? If you combine them, that's 12 versus 8 billion. It almost seems like the U.S. government's funding their competitors more.
Well, yeah, it's not like TSMC and Samsung are going to collaborate, to conspire against Intel. But I think it's a good thing. And Global Foundry's got money. A lot of people got money. Micron got money. I really lobbied for Micron because, my gosh, we need memory in the United States. 98% of the memory is made in Korea, and one well-placed nuke could take the memory off the map, and without memory, logic's useless. So it's a big picture thing. But I think the other governments, in fact, I just published an article about this today, looking at all the money in the world that's being given to the semiconductor effort, and it's a big view. Where the tax savings are included, even though you don't get those unless you do a certain performance, etc. But it's billions and billions and billions of dollars that the semiconductor industry has never gotten in the past, right? So in 40 years, I've never seen anything like this, and I think what's going to come of it, to be honest with you, is oversupply. I mean, hopefully we can fill these fabs, but I kind of question it. And Intel is part of this. That they got a big place in Ohio, and by the way, there's really no water there. I just did a podcast with a guy who does the ultra pure water for fabs, and he said, yeah, the Ohio choice was kind of interesting. And I said, well, what about Arizona? I mean, that's a desert. He goes, well, there's an aquifer, underneath that they take the water from, so they have plenty of water there. But Ohio, not so much. So it's just funny, as how is Intel going to build all these fabs? Okay, maybe they can do it, but can they fill them? Can they get customers to fill them? And that's going to be a pretty big challenge.
Yeah, I mean, and again, if it costs more to make, and TSMC is going to have they might have some trouble. Actually, I agree. I actually think maybe they're building too much. Everyone is right now. I want to ask this, though. This wasn't something I planned to ask you, but it's something that I've thought about and heard behind the scenes. It's not like a sexy headline for a YouTube video, but a major because you see everyone bring up, what if China nukes Taiwan, which probably isn't going to happen. Well, definitely not that, I don't think. But and then that they just stop there. Like, if we have Taiwan, we're safe. But it's like there's so much that goes into making a chip in China that isn't just 2 nanometer. I mean, there's the heat sinks, there's boards. I mean, I've heard that all heat sinks are basically China. I'm wondering what you think are the biggest blind spots in CHIPS Act funding for if Taiwan was just, the show The Leftovers disappears. We don't know where it went. The island disappears. And then all relations with China fall apart. I don't think it's just the foundries. You brought up some things what should the U.S. government be funding more to make sure that we actually can build a full graphics card with a heatsink and a board and the whole CPU and desktop and laptop in the United States, or at least within all of the West or something?
Yeah, it's just not possible. That's the funny thing is, so I spent a lot of time in Taiwan. It's my second home. They have this thing called the Silicon Shield, they call it. And it's, they're shielded from hostilities because they control so much of the semiconductor process. And, it's just gotten stronger with all the news about semiconductors and now the CHIPS Act. But, replicating what they do in Taiwan in the United States is just not possible. And even Taiwan doesn't have some of the key steps, right? They don't have any of the equipment, manufacturing equipment. So there's thousands of steps to build a finished semiconductor, and you'll never capture all those. And if you take one out, that's it. The house of cards folds. So it's just not possible. And China knows that. They won't attack Taiwan. It's absurd. If they did, the entire semiconductor industry would come to a halt. And
that includes theirs. you know.
Yeah. And the same thing with South Korea, by the way, because there will be no memory. And so, it's a big risk, but who's going to do that? That's scorched earth. China, the whole economy of the world will come to a halt. And by the way, whoever does that is going to have a lot of enemies, because think of life without semiconductors, and who are they going to blame, right? So hopefully we're all smart enough not to do anything like that, but yeah, you never know. But if somebody does something like that, boy, I tell you, I think it's going to be North Korea, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I've never been there. I've spent a lot of time
You've never been
China.
to North Korea. What a surprise.
No. I've spent a lot of time in China. I was there when the pandemic broke out. I kind of got stuck there. And, it's just not the China I know. But, who knows?
Yeah, I mean, not to get off subject, but it's a lot, the elephant in the room, someone would point out. We all thought that about Russia invading Ukraine, that there's no way these people are that crazy. I just remember the week before, I'm just looking at the math here, this would be the biggest disaster ever. I mean, when you look at the U.S. having trouble holding on to Vietnam, and the population difference there was 10-1. Well, the population difference is 3-1. They're never going to take it. This is ridiculous. But Taiwan's on an island, so hopefully that would deter, in a rocky cliff-like island. So you hope that would deter them more. But it is interesting you bring up. I said Samsung, Freudian slip. You bring up South Korea because North Korea is definitely crazier, and they're closer. There's no island they need to go across, shallows they need to wade through, and all of the memories there. Honestly, to go back to the question, actually, it seems like you think we are fundamentally not funding enough RAM and memory production in the United States. Yeah,
I was shocked when Micron really wasn't being looked at closely, and then they were, and they did get a big chunk of money. But, if you think about it, we do make semiconductors in the U.S. In fact, I think we have more fabs than anybody, but they're older fabs. It's just the leading edge semiconductors we're really concerned about. And but whereas in memory, 98% is out of one place, South Korea. So, hopefully we all can, be mature adults about this. The Ukraine thing was surprising to me too. But the big thing is Ukraine really isn't pivotal to the world. And I think
besides China, food.
Yeah, right. I think what China would do actually is to blockade the Taiwan Strait. Right. So if they blockaded the Taiwan Strait, they could, control Taiwan. But a lot of other people use the Taiwan Straits. And so, it's not going to be pretty. Right. It's not going to be just isolating Taiwan. It's going to be isolating a lot of countries. And, I just hopefully it won't happen. But the problem is you really can't duplicate what we do everywhere in the world in one place. Right. So, we have semiconductor equipment manufacturers all over the world. ASML, is critical to leading edge semiconductors. And so, you take out ASML, then, what are you going to do? So there's a lot of choke points we have in this industry. And, for anybody to say, oh, we're going to build an independent semiconductor industry in the United States, no, it's just not going to happen. But I like the effort.
Yeah, I mean, it can hopefully help, and maybe if we look in terms of decades, it will make the entire supply chain more resilient. But it's decades, not years, for that to effectively happen, I'm sure.
I believe so.
Now that it's warming up outside, Jessie couldn't be happier to be jumping around every day in the warmer weather. And it's good for me too. Running around with her, teaching her tricks, that's good for my health as well, not just hers. But all of this gallivanting, well, it takes up time and it pressures me to make my lunches quicker to get moving faster with Jesse every weekend afternoon, and usually quick means less healthy. Well, unless you know about Vite Ramen, this piece of content is brought to you by Vite Ramen. Vite Ramen is a healthy, tasty, and shelf-stable food crafted by an American startup that offers a ton of options for eating healthy, like their classic packages that make it easy to add protein and other ingredients of your choice, and then also their Ramen Go packages that offer a healthy microwavable option for those who truly only have a 15-minute lunch break away from home. And I do need to take a second also to remind everyone that they don't just make ramen. They also have Nano Boost Vitality Powder that I honestly think blows away the health powder competition. I literally drink this any night a broken silicon is recorded extra late instead of coffee. And they also have a collection of silverware and accessories that are always high quality. Like the Goofy Girl DM Nakiri knife, I tried it out. It is insanely sharp. It is probably the nicest knife this household owns. So not just the ramen, although the ramen's great. Everything else on there is high quality. And that's why I've been working with Vite Ramen for so long. I actually like their products, all of their products, a lot. I've never tried something they made that wasn't good. So check them out. And remember that even just clicking on the link in the description helps the channel a ton, and buying some of the special packs through that link helps you save money and support the channel even more. So support Moore's Law Z by checking out Vite Ramen today. All right, so I got a question here going back to Intel. The Immortal Cameraman writes in and he says, would you see Global Foundries' sugar daddy swooping in and buying Intel Foundries? And if so, would that make Global Foundries much more competitive against TSMC? It's kind of a different question. What about Nvidia buying Intel in a couple of years? And this is something that I've heard some people bring up for fun, but I heard that and I reached out to maybe other people kind of like you are veterans in the industry. Like, I know how wild that sounds, but like Intel's pretty flat to down in earnings for a few years now. And man, Nvidia is worth entire countries. Is there any, I don't know about Global Foundry or their owner buying Intel, but like, what do you think about Nvidia buying Intel? And the one thing that sticks in my brain like an RFK brainworm is just this thought of I keep hearing that Jensen wants to make gaming CPUs at some point. I keep hearing that. If he bought Intel, there's that x86 and all the licenses he needs, maybe, if it's legal. I wonder what you think about the possibility of someone buying Intel, buying parts of Intel Foundries, and if Nvidia, you think, would ever make some insane play like that in like a few years.
I don't think so. I don't think there's enough value there for them. Back when Intel was doing a CEO change, I was really lobbying for them to buy Nvidia so Jensen could be the CEO. And that's the only way you get him, right? You'd have to buy his company. And this was maybe 15 years ago, and they hired this guy BK from internal, and he was the worst CEO they've ever had. Yeah. And boy, I tell you, I would have liked to see Intel buy Nvidia back then, but I don't see it going the other way. Jensen is a brilliant guy. He's one of my top CEOs out here in Silicon Valley, and I've been here for 40 years, and I really think the CEO is a big factor in the company's success and their culture. Everything, I think it really rides on the CEO. Look at AMD. Lisa Su came in and changed that company. I wasn't an AMD fan because they just had horrible CEOs and just horrible products. And it was just such a missed opportunity. But Lisa Su has turned them around. And you're right. You asked about AMD and market share. They're gaining market share for sure. Maybe not in the data center, but certainly in everything else. And, AMD used to get the not Intel business, right? Everybody wanted AMD to stay around. So everybody was throwing, money at them here and there, crumbs off the table. But now they're getting the your product's better business. And that's a whole new game. And so, with AMD nipping at Intel's heels and with, Intel's big customers making their own chips, I think it's going to be a challenge. I really do. I think the foundry business is a good alternative for them or a good option for them. But they're going to have to think of more things because it's a changing industry and it's not in their favor.
Let me see here. Well, let me actually jump right to that then. So how do you feel about AMD's current situation? Because from my perspective, they have almost won or effectively won from what I think they ever thought they could have achieved 6 years ago, right? I'm sure they want to do more. They still have the same competitors they had a decade ago. But I think they're definitely in a place where if they were to see the future in 2017, they'd go, oh, we did it. And I just wonder how much you think their position is fortified to not go backwards from where it is now. And what do you think is next for them? And I want to couch this with a leak just came out of like a Dell roadmap from video cards that entirely backs up what I said a year ago, which was that from what I am seeing, Lunar Lake is like a low-end thing. It won't compete with Zen 5 laptop across the stack. Arrow Lake's delayed. Panther Lake might not come out till beginning of 26, which means it's a Zen 6 competitor. And Nova Lake seems to be a Zen 7 competitor. So they just feel like a half generation behind AMD for the next few years.
Yeah. I don't think it's a fair race. What saved AMD's business was their relationship with TSMC, right? And it's just not fair. It's AMD and TSMC against Intel. And, now that Intel is using TSMC, I guess it's leveling out. But, Intel has the best packaging in production right now, right? And it's coupled with their manufacturing. And we've really never seen that before in the foundry business. And AMD has just, really fallen in step with TSMC. Some people say, AMD might change to Samsung or this or that. I don't think so. Not unless TSMC told them to, really. But, the technology that's come out of AMD over the last, 3 to 5 years, it's just mind-blowing. It really is, especially for us guys in Silicon Valley who've known AMD, for 20 plus years. And that's one of the problems I have, with Intel's business is AMD really has caught up. It's good for Intel because now Intel has true competition. And just like Intel Foundries is good for TSMC, but I think that's more imaginary competition than true competition as of yet. But, it really has told Intel, you'd better change directions and you'd better, really get moving. Otherwise, you're going to lose. And so AMD has done a great thing for TSMC. TSMC has done a great for the AMD. And in whole, on the business side, in the industry side, it's done a great thing for Intel because you're going to see some huge changes. If not, they're going to die, right? So that's how
a great thing for Intel if you're a fan of good Intel products, not if you're a fan of Christmas bonuses for their employees or something.
Yeah. Well, the thing is competition in this business has always been key. And, this is the funny thing is, Intel really has been slapping TSMC around. And, when Intel first told me they're going in the business, foundry business again, I said, hey, speak softly, carry a big stick. That's the key to competing with TSMC. Because if you speak loudly and you got a little tiny stick, you're going to get killed. Boy, the TSMC symposium this year was different. They were a little bit smug. They really are killing it out there, right? And so, you really got to be careful what you say because you're motivating TSMC to be even better when you're not even close. It's not a good idea.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. And, you look at how Intel talked when he said AMD's in our rear view mirror. And that's just my favorite. Oh, for sure. I mean, it lit a fire under AMD. Yeah. They were like, oh, okay, well, guess what? We're going to have Zen 4, then Zen 5 less than 2 years later, and then Zen 6 less than 2 years. All right, here we go. And we're going to double the size of our employees. And and the whole graphics thing of how much they hype that up. Yeah. Good Lord. But that's its own story. So JJ Golden writes in, he says, hi, Tom and Daniel. With AMD CPUs and Nvidia GPUs becoming the de facto do-it-yourself high-end recommendation, is there not concern that they are entering a pseudo-duopoly market for these companies? From the latest leaks out of Moore's Law, it looks like 5000 series from Nvidia will again increase prices, it seems like it, due to little competition in high-end desktop. And then again, AMD is keeping margins low for quite some time to take market share for Intel. Will Intel's continued troubles as of late how long until AMD feels comfortable to adopt the NVIDIA GPU strategy with their CPUs? I think what he's saying is it kind of seems like AMD's still going for it hard. I know some people complain about prices, but what I'm seeing in their margins is AMD is trying to take market share just as much as get more margin right now, unlike NVIDIA where half of its margin or all of its margin. And how long until you think AMD would start acting a bit more like NVIDIA and CPU? Are they even remotely close to starting to do that?
I think they are close because from what I know, and I only know on the semiconductor side, right? So I'm not sure what things are going on in the retail outlets, but AMD's chips are better. For the first time, they are significantly better. And they're still buying market share. I get that. That's fine. But at some point in time, they're going to take advantage and, get bigger margins, just like Nvidia has. One thing we track in the industry, in the health of the whole semiconductor industry, is ASPs, which is the average selling price of the chips, versus units, which is how many units you sell, right? And thanks to Nvidia, they're really an outlier. ASPs are so much higher than they've been in the past in comparison to units shipped. So we're actually not shipping that many units, but our percentage of growth, in the industry, which this year could be 10 to 20%, it's mostly ASPs. And, and of course, Nvidia is the biggest example, but all companies are doing this. Everybody's getting, and TSMC is raising prices, right? So that's not good. We need competition to keep the ASPs down and keep unit counts up for the industry to grow, because the more units we ship, the more we learn, the more we develop, and TSMC is not benefiting from Nvidia's high ASPs, right? In fact, the TSMC CEO was laughing. He said, "Yeah," he said, "I sell them a chip for a few dollars, and I sell them a wafer for a few dollars, and they sell me a chip for 200,000." So, everybody's got to share in these profits for the industry to grow, healthy growth. But AMD, I think they're probably getting close to where they can say, "Hey, we're going to charge as much as Intel." I think right now they're maybe less, but or maybe a little bit more than Intel. And I don't think Intel is really good at price wars. I don't know, but they certainly don't need one, right? They need margins.
Yeah, I mean, I've been talking about it in video after video, how Intel's margins, because this was a thing you saw from the armchair experts on Reddit and in YouTube comment sections. Like, it almost sounds like the people talking about Nintendo with the Wii, and then they had the disaster Wii U. They're just like, well, remember Nintendo, remember Intel just has unlimited money forever. They always will. They can afford to do whatever they want. And I'm like, I don't know if you're looking at their earnings since 2022. It's actually starting to become an issue here. And I feel like AMD is going to not be really greedy this year, but for Zen 6 seems like a home run. And if what the roadmaps are showing right now are correct, that Intel really won't have a competitor to Zen 6 until a year after it comes out, I think Zen 6 is when we're going to maybe start seeing some NVIDIA-like actions from AMD, and that's just a year from now, or maybe a little more than a year from now. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because it will be, I wonder how much AMD will act that way in more than just CPU, though, because we have a weird situation here where, like, AMD can probably get away with it with their CPUs, but their GPUs, they're still going to have to justify undercutting NVIDIA to really go into that place. And when I hear about these things like Strix Halo that are like basically GPU size, well, big GPU sized APUs for laptops, I can't help but wonder too if that's like a Trojan horse to make you at gunpoint buy a graphics card. Finally, you have to. It's part of the APU.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, higher ASPs are good. For sure, because it helps the industry grow. But we have to have higher unit counts to fill these fabs, and higher ASPs also encourage people to make their own chips, right? And it's just it's an interesting balance we're going to see. But right now we're heavy on the ASPs. But if you look at the EDA industry and the IP industry, the things that people buy to make chips, EDA is not a high-growing industry. I've been in it for 30 of my 40 years, and it's a single-digit growth industry. But over the last 3 years, it's been double-digit. It's been like 15% last year. And what that tells you is a huge amount of people are buying tools, so a huge amount of people are making chips. But you won't actually see it on the market for another 2 to 3, maybe 4 years, right? And so it's coming. There's going to be a flood of new products that will allow people, to get a better deal for silicon rather than buying off-the-shelf chips. But I think you got a few years for price gouging. So I would bet AMD is going to jump on board as soon as they can.
So I'm curious about this too. This is a question that keeps popping up from fans for podcast episodes, but how much emphasis do you think, or how much market share in GeForce gaming graphics cards do you think NVIDIA would kind of sacrifice to just focus everything on AI? Because I think we've seen some taking of graphics market share, gaming graphics market share with AMD last year. Right now, I don't know if it's just the consoles or not. It seems like they're not taking much in quarter one of this year, but it sounds like AMD's going to go pretty hard with a mass-produced, relatively cheaper 16 gigabyte card for the like mid-range this year. And it sounds like to me Nvidia will have some high-end stuff, but it's $1,000 plus stuff this year.
Mm.
And I've heard Lovelace sales have not been that great, but they're making record profits from AI, and I can't help but wonder, I don't know what percent, let's say Nvidia controls 70% of the gaming graphics market. Do you think they would happily give up 10% if it meant they could just keep doubling AI revenue? Or at what point do you think Nvidia cares about they always care, but like really cares? Like, would they care if they let AMD get half of the gaming market from them as long as they just continue to dominate AI? And do you think that's a calculation they're having to make right now?
It's a big concern of mine because AI is the buzzword and everybody's doing AI. And I think it's a bubble. And, NVIDIA is making huge amounts of money on AI, right? And I've known Jensen for years, and I've seen him recently, a couple, 2-3 weeks, several times over the last few weeks. I've never seen him more relaxed in his entire, career. I mean, the guy is so relaxed. And, I think that that's not necessarily a good thing. And anybody who's putting all their, resources, their R&D into AI, I think they're going to be sorely disappointed. So I doubt that Jensen would do that. But you know what? I just don't know now that I've seen him a few times. And, he really is doing victory laps, and certainly well-deserved. But, I think you really have to stay in the trenches and fight for all of your business, rather than focus on, one market segment, no matter how big it is.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, because, they're doing, no one would say they're doing bad in graphics cards, but, I've done some polling. I've seen, channels with over 1 million subscribers do some polls on YouTube. And it's actually startling, like the amount of people that, like, when they ask, like, what is your opinion of NVIDIA from this last generation? It's like 70-80% are like, screw those guys. And
Wow.
it's like, yes, a lot of people are buying NVIDIA. DLSS is great. They're more efficient than AMD usually right now, sometimes a lot more efficient. And, they're better at ray tracing. They definitely have the mind share when it comes to software, fair or not. And so you look at that and you can see why they're making decent sales, but then you can also go, I just feel like, and I've heard a little bit of this coming out of NVIDIA recently, that's not at the top, but kind of in the middle, that some people are starting to be worried that, like, if they were to charge $1,200, $1,500 for the 5080, which let us remember that used to be a $500 to $700 card, that if they actually do that, and then AMD comes out with a $500 thing that's only 20-30% weaker, like that, the market may be poised to switch. I don't know that I even have that much to ask or say about that, but I just wonder if at the very top of NVIDIA, they're maybe either underestimating how much people may be primed to give them a spanking in that area, or if they do see it and they go, we're making record profits, we only have so much bandwidth, it's worth it.
Well, it's also unit count, right? That's a huge, unit volume market for them. And it's important to their whole business and their relationship with their manufacturers and economies of scale. So it would be hard to believe that they're going to neglect that.
That's true with economy of scale, yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to believe. Hopefully they're smarter than that. But I tell you, the longer I've been in this business, the more I realize is that, the executive staff, the executive levels, they're human like anybody else, and they do stupid things just like we do. And it could happen, but I'd be surprised.
All right, let me ask this. QH Frey writes, and he says, are any of the big market players considering or discussing the outlook of the market if the AI glut softens in the coming years behind the scenes? Do you think we are already seeing the first signs of demand tapering off? How much do you think it could slow? And what do you think the impact would be if it slowed a ton just in this year?
As I said, I think AI is a bubble. And, I go to a lot of these conferences and I see these people talk. Sam Altman, I've seen him, the OpenAI guy, I've seen him talk so many times. And recently he's been talking about optimizing the AI models. And, he's concerned about hardware and semiconductors and he gets it. I don't think he's a technologist, but he understands that we can't support these bloated AI tools, these bloated AI models. We don't have the hardware, we don't have the water, we don't have the power, the electricity. So lately, he's talking about optimized models and smaller models and more optimized. So there's a lot you can do in software that changes the demand for hardware. And I think early on in AI, we're just throwing millions and trillions of lines of code out there. But I think we're going to be working on optimizing so we can actually run this stuff efficiently, in a cost-effective manner. So I think right now we're still, just throwing everything out there, and we're going to build as many fabs and data centers as we can. But I think when maturity hits, we're going to realize there's better ways to do this AI stuff and maybe more economical, right?
Yeah, and that's a concern I have with the AI bubble, especially as it pertains to NVIDIA, is you have to train it. How do you train it? I don't know. Yeah. The code's new. Let's just buy as much crap as we can and throw it in a shed. But once it's trained, we need the devices to do something with it. And I don't know that we need as much hardware for training. I mean, how exposed do you think? And again, when I hear these rumors of like, well, they made Blackwell launch as soon as possible. They're trying to make Rubin launch less than a year after Blackwell does. Like, and one of the ways I read into that is I think they know the bubble could pop. And so, it's hottest, they want to get like 3 generations out in 2 years so that they just drown the competition. And if the bubble pops, NVIDIA made their money, then they just launched some, RTX 6000 series that is actually aggressive and laugh all the way to the bank. But like, how exposed do you think NVIDIA could be to the AI bubble popping versus other people, considering so much of it just seems to be them shipping as many Hopper chips as they can?
Oh, huge. It's huge. And you know what's funny is Sam Altman said he was doing something at Stanford, and apparently Sam Altman went to Stanford for a year and then dropped out and became a billionaire. So he's talking to the students at Stanford. I don't know how motivating that was, but one of the students said, hey, one word describe GPT-4. And Sam said, embarrassing. He said, it's fat, it's bloated. I mean, so we are going to be able to, reduce the overhead of AI. And I think people are just, a little bit drunk on this AI stuff and throwing hardware at it. But, it's definitely a bubble, but it's going to be a big driver in the industry, maybe half of what, we're dreaming of, but it's still going to be very important.
Yeah, and I think on that note you just said there, that's something that people misunderstand for me, and maybe you and other people that come on this podcast and talk about this, where they're like, why do you keep calling AI a bubble? It's the real deal. And it's like, I never said it won't be important. It's just, but everything that's new, frankly, becomes a bubble because it becomes so valuable. And then, okay, that's what it was really worth. But then it just keeps going and it's going to pop. And I can't help but feel like, maybe Sam Altman's company is kind of like, Amazon or something, where it got way overvalued in the dot-com bubble, popped, and then never got back to where it was for over a decade. But that never means it was valueless. It's just I was talking, it was funny, to one of my veteran contacts, and I had this Hawkpoint tablet that I've loved. I've been playing with for a while now. There's a review for it out there, but it has the newest AMD AI engine. And I was talking to him, like, he's like, it just seems like AI is still vaporware. And he said that after I said to him, a lot of the submissions from fans for reviews were, can you test like AI apps? And I said, no, there aren't. I mean, no app I use uses it. And I actually had to like look around, and I found, I don't know if Windows Hello does, it might, but like the one thing I guess the laptop comes with that uses the AI engine right now is it can make it look like your eyes are looking at the camera, and it looks kind of goofy. And if that's all we're doing, but if that's all we're doing with this part of the silicon that took all of this R&D this year, it better be a lot more than that next year. I mean, all you talk about is AI, and all you're doing is giving me like Disney World cartoon eyes and web conferences.
Well, there's a lot of AI generated media out there now, and I do a lot of research and a lot of reading, and I can tell. But at some point in time, I won't be able to tell. And deep fakes and AI porn and all this, horrible things that people are going to do with AI. But in fact, Sam Altman got questioned about this a couple of times, and he laughed about it. He said, there's good and bad with every technology, but hopefully, good will win out over evil. But the thing is that, AI is still, it's still in the research phase. We're still trying to figure it out. But remember when crypto came out, and in the semiconductor industry, we had a bubble. Everybody was buying chips for crypto mining and making crypto chips.
Yeah, we're going to put art and land contracts on the blockchain for no reason. Like 99% of the uses were useless.
Yeah, but we saw how that was a fairly quick bubble. I don't think AI is going to be that big of a bubble, and I'm really talking about for the semiconductor industry, right? I don't know about the other folks, but right now we have a lot of stuff going on, and AI is going to touch a lot of industries. In fact, every one of them, right? Automotive, you see, and I think the automotive industry is one of the more interesting ones because I do a lot of this on my podcast. The automotive guys are very talkative, and I always ask them, do you think we'll have fully automated cars? And AI-driven cars, and they all say yes, right?
Well, they've been saying yes for 15 frickin' years.
But you know what? I was on the podcast with a guy the other day, and I said, well, I say no. I say, if you took every car off the road and only put automated ones on, yes. But if you allow people with regular automobiles who will harass the automated ones, like myself, no. It's just not going to work. And, pedestrians are not going to know if it's an automated car or if it's a real car. And it's just not going to work. But there's a lot of things AI can do for us in the automotive space and is doing for us. And anytime you involve AI with an application like automotive chips or anything, it's going to increase the size and it's going to increase the need for speed, which is leading edge semiconductors. So that's a really good thing. AI is going to continue to drive the semiconductor industry, but it's going to be in all different facets, not any one specifically. So data center AI, yeah, we're bubbling. We're definitely just going crazy. But there are other industries, the phone, the car, appliances, I don't know, where AI is going to touch. And it's really going to be a continued boom for the semiconductor industry. But you can't say it's just AI, right?
Clean Sweep writes in, and he says, assuming that the rise in AI naming isn't just some ASUS exclusive thing, what's the possibility that AMD may name a lot of their next lineup on laptop AI? So I don't know if you've seen these rumors that I laughed when I saw them, but there's i9, i7, R9, R5, at least some of AMD's next-gen chips may not be called R9, not i9, but AI9, AI7. Clean Sweep asks, how much do you think that naming is a scheme to just show up more in search engines?
Yeah, isn't Intel saying AI everywhere or something like that?
Yes.
Yeah. The last conference I was at, if we had to drink alcohol every time they said AI, we'd be dead. I mean, it was just ridiculous. And it's in EDA, it's in IP, everything is AI. And that's why, I say bubble, because it's just being taken out of context. But, product names, absolutely. And I don't know if you remember during the dot-com bubble years and years ago, people were putting .com in the company's name. Seriously.
Just literally calling their company that, yeah.
Yeah, petfood.com, that's what they said. And it was kind of nuts. But the same thing is going to happen with AI. And, I'm all for it. I'll name my website SemiWiki AI. I got no problem with that.
And you will show up on Google more often then.
I'm sure I would.
Ever feel like a dog chasing its tail as you scour dozens of eBay postings and CD websites looking for a safe way to get reasonably priced Microsoft software? Well, you don't have to do that. Just go to cdkeyoffer.com. This piece of content is sponsored by cdkeyoffer.com that offers both Microsoft operating systems, Office products, select games, and even some gaming hardware peripherals for reasonable prices. And they've been a sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead and the entire team here for years for a reason. They've been good to me. They've been good to Dan. They've been good to dozens of me and Dan's family members and friends for years now. And they've also been good to the Moore's Law is Dead community. So whether you're looking for Steam, EA, Uplay, or PlayStation keys, or of course Microsoft products or gaming peripherals, support Moore's Law is Dead by using the offer code BrokenSilicon for 25% off all Microsoft products and Die Shrink for 3% off everything else on the website. Support Moore's Law is Dead by supporting one of our best long-term sponsors, cdkeyoffer.com today. Paul Hope writes in, and he says, a few months ago, Lisa Su was asked what she was most excited about that was in development. She answered, the next big thing in AI. On an engineering standpoint, where do you see the future taking AI compute? And with that, how will FPGAs evolve into the fabric? Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I can think of all these things we could use AI for, whether it's gaming, productivity, really just helping us do everything better. But I think I'm not excited about AI. I'm excited about the next phase because that's when it will be useful.
Yeah. Yeah, using AI tools right now is fairly difficult. I've been playing with them, and you really have to have a knack for it. But at some point in time, it'll be, seamless. You won't even know. And, Apple has had neural processors, they've had AI processors in their phone for some time. I think it came with the thumbprint thing, image recognition, or at least when you can open your phone with your face. But, so AI has been around, and we just didn't know it. And that's when, AI has really come, to bear good results, is you won't even know it, right? It'll just be part of your everyday life. I don't know how long it's going to take for us to get there, but I really don't think it's going to take a huge amount of hardware as much as you're seeing today because of the bubble. I think, Sam Altman really put it very, very politely. He said, yeah, I'm embarrassed at this product because it is so big and fat and consumes so much of the planet's resources. Sam Altman is a very, green guy per se, very planet oriented guy. He's a vegetarian. He's worried about the planet. Well, AI could kill the planet, and people in the audience were always all worried about AI going rogue, and that certainly could happen. But
yeah,
I think Sam's biggest concern was AI consuming our resources. And so that's what people are thinking now, and that's what people need to think is, do we really need all these huge, server farms and these new semiconductors to power AI? And I think during the development phase, yes. During the training phases, yes. But at some point in time, it'll be no.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. I think it was the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella. He said they really called their AI co-pilot for a reason, because you do need to be in charge right now. If you're someone trying to make AI do everything, it just won't work. I do think and that goes along well with what you said about driving as well. I just think AI could make it so we never crash, but if we let it be on its own, it's just going to ram into ambulances. And so and why would we want this world where we're useless? Just make it us get more done. And I just don't think it's quite there yet, but you can see some areas. I really suspect in the next 5 years, because my brother is in genetics, and so he has to know a lot of coding, because that's basically what genetics is now. And he was like, okay, well, let's see if this can write this thing for me. And it said, with all this authority, here it is, and this will do this for you, Dan. His name's also Dan. And then he looked at it and he goes, half of this code just doesn't work. So I think it's more. I think we need to come to terms with the fact that what it's going to be is, how could I do this quicker? And it helps you. Does this make sense? Yeah. It'll help you a little, not it did my job for me. And I think I just out for fun on Copilot on my tablet. I'm tell me about D-Day, and it just got half of the facts wrong. And that's one of the most discussed things online. You think they would get those facts correctly?
When ChatGPT first came out, I put my name in it, and it was very flattering. They knew who I am, which is good, but so many incorrect statements. But every once in a while, I type it in, and it's gotten better. And now the one I just typed it in the other day. It's actually factual, and it's very flattering. But so it changes. But you mentioned the Copilot thing. Do you remember when Tesla came out and called their automated driving autopilot?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I'm a pilot, and boy, I really took offense to that, because Copilot, the definition of Copilot is a fully capable pilot next to you that can take over when you need a break, but the pilot is still in charge. With autopilot, it gives the impression that you can
you're the co-pilot,
that you don't need a pilot. And Tesla doesn't say that anymore. I don't know how that got through the lawyers. But a friend of mine said that Elon Musk was insistent on it. But yeah, they got sued. And are
we really going to talk about Elon Musk and things that get through lawyers? By the way, I actually looked myself up in Copilot too, Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel. And the first 3 paragraphs were right, very flattering, very nice.
Yeah.
They tend to see, Tom is being correct about this, and he has a track record of that. And then they link to a video that wasn't from my YouTube channel. At the end, I'm like, you almost had it. I mean, how could you get all this right and then just link to the wrong video?
Yeah. I sent it to my kids and said, "Hey, look me up on ChatGPT," and they don't care. They're like, "Yeah, so what, Dad?" I'm like, "Hey, I was in Time magazine." They're like, "We don't even know what that is. What's Time magazine?" What's wrong with your generation? Don't you read Time magazine?
No. Some people are worried about reading in general right now.
But anyway, the autopilot thing is very valid, and I think AI will be an autopilot for quite some time. Maybe it will. I mean, copilot. Maybe at some point in time it'll be autopilot, but definitely a copilot situation.
All right, so I want to pivot to some final Foundry questions, if that's okay here. B-Fish writes in, and he says, "Hi, Tom and Daniel. Previously, AMD was dual sourcing by using 6 and 7 nanometer nodes, with cutting-edge products being used on the newer nodes. With news that AMD might use Samsung 4 nanometer for lower-end products, can you talk about this and how it could affect their product offerings, pricing, and volume moving forward?" And I will just jump in first, and I think I could see them using some Samsung in the future, but I still really hear that Samsung's cutting-edge nodes don't really work well to this day. But I wonder what you think.
No, Samsung, they're hit and miss. So 10 nanometer was horrible. 7 nanometer was very good. 5 and 4 were horrible. 3 nanometer is bad. So they're probably the lowest they've been. But the thing is, with chiplets, you can do that, right? You can grab a chiplet from any foundry and put it together. The reason why I know AMD's not doing it is because TSMC will not package other foundries' chiplets. And so if you're using TSMC packaging, you can bet there's no other foundries' chiplets in that package. And AMD is very dependent on TSMC's packaging. So,
Carbon Cry writes in, and he says, "How big is the advantage AMD gets by not using COWOS, advanced packaging, whenever they can avoid it? From my research, they use ASE for organic interposers, LSI, and even silicon interposers, with UMC making the silicon, and I'm not talking about Xilinx."
Yeah. UMC used to be Xilinx's partner. They used to make all their products, but at 28 nanometer, they moved to TSMC. And, so UMC might have some legacy products from Xilinx, but not the new ones. CoWoS came to AMD from Xilinx. So they bought the Xilinx company, and the Xilinx Semiconductor, the silicon team, is the best one in the industry. I mean, I worked with those guys, so sharp. And they actually invented CoWoS with TSMC maybe 12, 13 years ago. But AMD is committed to CoWoS now, and the problem is TSMC doesn't have the capacity to satisfy everybody with CoWoS, so they do have to go elsewhere temporarily. But building fabrication, building fabs is very difficult. Building packaging houses is not. So TSMC is doubling, tripling, quadrupling packaging this year. And so you will not see people changing packaging, splitting packaging vendors. They all want to go to TSMC if TSMC can have the capacity. But I don't know if TSMC is going to change their business model of allowing other die into their packages. But I ask them just every time I see them, and the answer is no, they will not.
Joe Schmo writes in, he says, "Hi, Tom and Daniel, longtime listener, first-time questioner. As the current reticle limit dictates the physical size of chips, do you see the technical limitation potentially being resolved or overcome in future nodes?" I remember even in 2019 at Hot Chip seeing the Cerebrus wafer scale chip. You see Apple kind of going bigger than reticle. You see the professional version of Blackwell using 2 chips, but it's really, from my point of view, not really chiplets. I mean, Jensen literally says every part of B100 doesn't know if it's on which side of the chip. So that means it's basically an above reticle limit chip. They just spent their way into making double the size of the reticle limit. Like, do you see this becoming more and more of a thing where companies don't worry about the reticle limit as much because they can just make it bigger without performance hits?
Yeah. There are technologies coming. Backside power is going to help because it's just congestion. It's routing, and there's a lot of things you can do to shrink the die, to make it within the reticle. But I don't think it's really a concern. If you look at where we were 10 years ago to where we are today, there's been huge advances, and I don't see an issue. So that, and the concept of chiplets. I realize wafer scale is a big deal, and it's a nice accomplishment, but it is not good on the economies of scale. It's not good on the economics of semiconductors.
No.
So I think it's very clever. I think it's cool. I think, one of those big wafers, they told me, they said they had so many cores. They have 900,000 cores, right? And I said, I had an interview with him, and I said, how many active cores are those? He goes, well, we guarantee 600,000. So 300,000 out of 900,000, like that's
right.
Not great in my opinion. But 600,000 is a lot of cores, and I don't remember what the exact numbers were. I wasn't able to write about it at that point in time. But there's a lot of things we can do. I personally think chiplets is what people should be thinking about and researching, because I think whoever can do chiplets well will win. And this means AMD, this means Nvidia, this means everybody, because chiplets really are going to speed up the design process. They're going to do a huge cost savings, because you don't have to have every chiplet at the same process. You don't have to have everybody at 3 nanometer or 2 nanometer. And that means that, you don't need huge yields at 3 nanometer, 2 nanometer. You just need to get these little chiplets out, not these huge chips. And so it's really going to change the world, and I'm happy to see it. It's not there yet, but, give us another 5 years.
Would you say that Nvidia seems to be behind AMD and maybe Intel in chiplets right now? Like, I keep hearing it. Of course, they have Skunksworks teams behind the scenes. They're working on chiplet designs. They'd be idiots not to be doing that. Of course they are. But I keep seeing them. So again, some people said, oh, look, B100 uses chiplets. Not really. It's like they chose to do the opposite of use chiplets. Just use these giant dies that have, I don't want to say yield issues, but they're so big, they're not going to have perfect yields. Like, do you think this is a symptom of NVIDIA knowing what's right? And if they wanted to make something like Zen 5, Turin, they could? Or is this a sign that maybe they are a bit behind in chiplets, and so they're forced to double down on monolithic more and more?
Yeah. Intel is the first one into production with chiplets from different foundries, and that's a big deal. But Intel does their own packaging, and they're really good at packaging.
Well, Zen 2 used Global Foundries and TSMC for Zen 2, though.
So there's a difference between multi-die packaging and chiplets. Multi-die packaging is literally taking, an independent die and packaging it. So the first multi-die I did was for an FPGA. They literally put 2 FPGA dies together to double the capacity, or they throw on some HBM memory and such. So I don't know how AMD did it with the Global Foundries chiplet or the Global Foundries die, but I don't know if that would qualify as a chiplet. But okay, say they did, that's great, but not as big as Intel. Their whole chip is chiplets, right? So they have 6, 7, 8 chiplets in this package, and that is a pretty tremendous feat. It really is.
Well, so I want to touch on that quick, but I also want to come back to, do you think B100 indicates NVIDIA's behind in chiplets? But also, from what I'm seeing with Meteor Lake, though, look, there's a real benefit to being monolithic. I mean, the good samples, especially if the node's smaller, and they're mostly good samples, it's just better. I mean, it is just better if it's a perfect monolithic yield. And I can't help but look at Meteor Lake's efficiency issues against, frankly, I don't want to say rebrand, but not totally brand new chips from AMD this year. And they seem to be about the same efficiency ago. Are they using too many chiplets? Did they say, AMD, hold my beer, and then go, oh, wait, that's right, chiplets have downsides? So that's a concern I have with it. Yes, if it becomes perfect, sure, that'd be great. But like Ponte Vecchio, it just, all these things seem to have a lot of complexity issues and a lot of issues getting verified with all the chiplets working at the same time. So again, I want to ask, do you think NVIDIA, there's indications they're still behind in chiplet tech, but also do you think maybe Intel's doubling down on chiplets too much?
Yeah. Well, here's the thing is, if you're looking for performance and, brute force technology like NVIDIA has, chiplets is not your answer. Okay. And so, I don't think you'll ever see Apple doing chiplets because they have packaging issues and power issues. So, the mobile SoCs, I don't hear anything about companies doing chiplets. But, if you think about it, chiplets help you do things cheaply. And it's not necessarily a better chip. I agree with you. I think a monolithic chip is better, but it's really hard to yield monolithic chips, and you have to have a lot of money to make them. And so that's limiting. And chiplets will help the semiconductor industry grow, just like the fabless industry helped the semiconductor industry grow. But I wouldn't say you're behind if you're not using chiplets in any case, especially when margins are so high, right?
Oh, yeah, I heard someone bring this up to me. I don't remember if it was in a podcast or behind the scenes, but they pointed out that if you are going like with B100 with this gigantic die, you're basically outsourcing the complexity issues to TSMC to solve for you instead of having to solve it on your end. And if you have unlimited, people are paying 50 grand for one of these chips.
Yeah.
Let TSMC solve it and let's get this thing out on time. That seems to be the opposite of what Intel's doing, though, and all of their things keep getting delayed.
Well, here's a trick that Intel's doing that I'm sure everybody knows, but I think it's worth pointing out is, they're developing new processes. And if you develop a new process to do a chiplet, it's a lot different than developing a process to do a big, monolithic SoC. So TSMC can't do that. That's a shortcut. So Intel's going to say, oh, yeah, we're in production in 18A, but it's a chiplet, right? That's not fair. That's not the right comparison, because the first chips out of TSMC's fabs are for Apple, which are very complicated, billions of transistors, which yield is a premium, right? And so, Intel is smart doing chiplets because they don't have to be held to the same benchmark for yield as TSMC. But, the downside is you can't make monolithic chips. And I think what you're saying is right. In some cases, a monolithic chip makes sense, and in some cases, maybe you can get away with chiplets. But, I wouldn't want to be forced to do one or the other. I'd want to be able to do both.
Yeah, I actually was told recently by someone at AMD that Zen 5 Strix APU started as all the Halo one will be chiplets, but even the smaller one started as chiplets, and halfway through development they were like, just make it monolithic. This thing's the disaster. They even considered. I was told they didn't move forward with it, but there was a meeting should we just use Zen 4 instead because of how many issues this is having? So just to give people an idea of how much more effort that takes, and then you compare that to AMD did decide to go monolithic, Intel didn't, and Meteor Lake was a year late. Yeah, I don't know. It just seems like everything Intel's doing is making a play for the IP to become a foundry, though. Again, they're building IP and expertise. I would worry at the expense of everything, though, to make sure they have the best foundries in a few years.
Well, it's a shortcut for them, right? Because doing a fab for chiplets is easier than doing a fab for massive monolithic chips. And as you said, a lot of these customers throw it over to TSMC and said, hey, here it is, let's go. And TSMC's like, shit, how are we going to do that? So, it's a trade-off. But I tell you, some of the moves Intel's made are perplexing to me. Some are brilliant, and some just look ridiculous. But, I don't have the same view as Pat Gelsinger does, right? So I'm in the trenches.
All right, so this might be the final question here, but I know it's something you wanted to touch on. Mark Smith writes in, and he says, how effective will ARM-based architectures compete with x86 in the long term? And what about RISC-V?
Yeah, so RISC-V is a big topic, and I'm a big ARM fan. I actually wrote co-authored a book about ARM. One of the definitive history of ARM books. The chairman of ARM actually did our forward. I love the company, but let me tell you, what's happening in the RISC-V world is going to change ARM and x86. It is a wildfire, and I track design starts, and there's not a one that doesn't have RISC-V on it. And, it starts out with just a little bit of a small core for security or some housekeeping cores. But now there are server cores, RISC-V, being built. And part of it is because of the monopolistic behavior of ARM, right? And, Intel or ARM or TSMC, everybody's going to want an alternative. And RISC-V is an alternative. But, all these processor companies that have their own proprietary cores are all changing to RISC-V. So the company in Taiwan called Andes, RISC-V. MIPS, the old core company, RISC-V. And now Synopsys is doing RISC-V. It's just amazing. And what happens is it builds this huge ecosystem of software and tools, and it's open source, right, per se. So you have all these software and tools, and it's just easy to build, and it's not ARM. So, the first couple design wins are, I'm not ARM, right? So people wanted an alternative, but now they're winning on merit. And it really is a new model, and it's completely different than how ARM does business. ARM is public now. They spun them off, and they're an IPO, everything. So we can actually see some transparency into what they're doing. And boy, I tell you, they're doing so well. I would have not guessed that they were doing this well. But RISC-V is going to catch them. And, it might be another 5 to 10 years because it takes a long time for us to build these semiconductors and to get them into the mainstream. But, x86 is in the middle, right, of these two behemoths. And I don't know if it's going to end well.
It's interesting, though. I keep seeing people say, like, x86 could be in trouble. And I just keep seeing, to me at least, it feels like a lot of that just was Intel stagnating, and AMD is still bringing these massive improvements every generation. So I think we're going to need to wait to see how the Snapdragon, what is it? Snapdragon X Elite. I feel like Elite X sounds better, but X Elite is coming out. And I know it does well in synthetics, but from what I'm hearing from OEMs, it's really not any better than the competition in performance. And I can't help but wonder, because, it's going to be competing with Strix, not Hawkpoint. It's not even out yet. And I can't help but wonder, like, if it's going to come out and people are going to have been expecting so much more. I don't feel like there's, again, a free lunch here with an instruction set. I think the reason people are using ARM is because it wasn't x86. Oh, sure. And I just wonder how many companies are going to stick with ARM, how many are just going to keep buying AMD and Intel, and how many are just all going to go to RISC-V instead of ARM, and it'll just almost be like Apple and 2 other companies using ARMs at a certain point.
Well, I think ARM's always going to be in business. They're always going to be the preferred microprocessor, but now there's a choice, and that's going to make ARM, do better, just like AMD makes Intel do better. But think about x86. AMD has done a world of good for x86, right? And they're not done. So I think it's nice to have 3 dominant architectures and at least have the illusion of having the option of one of 3. But, there's going to be x86 camps forever and ARM camps forever. But there's also
it's not like they're going to kill x86 or it has an inherent disadvantage where it will never last forever or something.
But there's also people that want to ride the new wave, and that's RISC-V. And I go to the RISC-V conferences. RISC-V is very big on SemiWiki. And the papers at the conferences are from all over the world. And some of the best papers I saw were from China. And, they're really jumping on RISC-V because they don't want to do x86, or they might not be able to do x86 or ARM. But also India, all over the world. I mean, just these brilliant papers. And that's an ecosystem that ARM can't replicate, right? Because they're independent, proprietary. But, I think you're going to have 3 big camps and 3 big opportunities, and that's good for the semiconductor industry, for everybody.
I forgot to bring this up earlier, but now I remember because we're talking about ARM. Nvidia tried to buy ARM. Do you think the government would even, or I should say multiple governments, would even allow Nvidia to buy Intel? I mean, why would they allow them to if they didn't allow them to buy ARM? I don't know.
They wouldn't. I don't think they would. I don't think Nvidia would do it anyway, but I don't think they would. The funny thing is the U.S. government is trying to restrict RISC-V in China. So it's an open source,
Yeah, I don't know how you're going to do that.
Well, you're not going to, right? Because it's an architecture, right? It's not a physical, device that you can ship over there. So it's just kind of funny. But x86 is being limited in China, and I think it will continue to be. And ARM has issues with China as well. But RISC-V is the perfect technology because it's free, right? So you don't have to steal it.
All right. Final question. Kodo writes in and says, hello, Tom and Daniel. What is the next big thing you are excited about in semiconductor manufacturing? I personally feel like the idea of truly 3D stacked chips with on-die cooling. Wish you a great day.
For me, it's chiplets because right now the big companies can do chiplets, but little companies really can't because there's no merchant chiplet market. And, there's a merchant IP market right now, and that didn't exist 20 years ago. For me, it's just chiplets.
And just like actual chiplets, not like AMD has 3 chips here, they have 5 chips there. A ton of chiplets, and anyone can order the hamburger they want from anyone.
The merchant market, chiplet stores, chiplet websites, they're already springing up, by the way, even though we don't have them. But, that's going to change semiconductor design, same as the fabless boom. You're not going to need to do all this work. You can pull some chiplets down, do a proprietary chiplet, and then just piece it together. How you semiconductor design today, and it's been like this for a while, you do blocks, right? Nobody designs one chip. They're all blocks, right? That are sewn together. But
and I hear AMD is getting stuff out faster than Intel a lot of the times, actually, because they're so good at outsourcing and automating the designing of IP blocks that they can just copy and paste between different SoCs.
That's exactly true. And so, we've been block designing for years and years. So chiplets really isn't that big of a deal for designers. We already know how to do it. It's just connecting those chiplets in the package, using some type of connection standard. And so, but we're developing that, and it's going to get there. But that's going to change the whole industry, because these companies that want to do their own chips, that maybe they'll be successful or not in the first pass, they will be able to go to the chiplet store and buy automotive chiplets and put them together and own their silicon.
I think that's a good note to end on then, unless there's anything else you wanted to bring up. But if there's not, thank you again so much for coming on, and please tell everybody where they can find you and where they should find anything else you want them to find.
Will do. And great talking to you again, and maybe we'll chat again next year.
Well, I will plug it for you, even if you forget to. Semiwiki.com. I know you have a podcast. I don't want to get it wrong. What was the name of your podcast? Is it just the Semiwiki podcast?
No, it's Semiconductor Insiders. It's about 2 years old. We put out an episode every Friday, and I talk to semiconductor professionals on different topics, and it's been truly enlightening. It's only 20 minutes, and it's just audio, so you can listen to it anywhere. But boy, I tell you, there are just some brilliant people out there, and you can, get an introduction to what they're doing. And as I said, we just did one on ultra pure water for fabs. I never really understood the water challenge for fabs. I knew it was an issue because I worked at a fab, and we, poisoned a lot of water. It's huge. Fabs use, just millions of gallons of water, and I'm not sure where Ohio is going to find the water. Maybe they'll have to truck it in, but yeah. Semiconductor Insiders. It's carried on all the podcast outlets. We have about 50,000 listeners, so hopefully you can join us.
All right, and check that out. And then, of course, also thank you for watching and listening to this. To anybody who is, it's Broken Silicon. Like, subscribe to Moore's Law Z on YouTube. Subscribe to Broken Silicon, your podcast app of choice. Give us a review on Apple Podcasts. That helps people outside of YouTube find us. And consider joining the Patreon to get it early and ad-free, the extra podcast iShrink, Ask Us Questions, the Discord. There's a ton of content out there for those who are interested in more of it. There's a new die shrink coming out this week, too. So perfect time to join. And again, thank you so much, Daniel, for coming on again. I'm sure we'll talk again as well. And thank you to everybody again for watching and listening.
Take care.
This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, it's not just me. Moore's Law is Dead is a team, with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, renders being done by the industrial designer Jean-Philippe Clermont, and special assistance is also provided by Carmen Cry and Carrie Nosugad as well. Find all of our information at www.mooreslawsdead.com on the about/support page. In the event you do want to hire me for consulting work, hire Gerard for audio work, hire Jean-Philippe for industrial design work, or you're interested in working with Carbon Cry or Carrie Nosugada as well. You can also find our long-term sponsors on that page if you want to show them some love for putting food on our tables. Or you can also mail us some love. You can send letters or hardware donations to the following address: Moore's Law is Dead, P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. Although, to be honest, the best way to show Moore's Law is Dead some love is to support us on Patreon. Patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content truly possible. Every month, and really every day, depending on who you're talking about, me, Gerard, Dan, and Jean-Philippe are working tirelessly to provide a steady stream of content that we could not keep doing unless we knew the work was possible without being reliant on sponsors dictating every little thing we put out. Don't get us wrong. We love our sponsors, but we love directly working for you, our fans, much more. If you have any extra money, even a couple free dollars a month, consider supporting us directly on Patreon. Those couple of monthly dollars will get you access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to ask guests questions, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord full of like-minded people who I am sure would love to meet you. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to early, ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the ability to ask questions in all Broken Silicon episodes and Loose Ends live streams ahead of the recording, and the entire back catalog of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, in addition to having thanks in the credits of videos and podcasts depending on the tier, with other perks available as well. And hey, if you cannot afford to support us directly every month, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family, and on social media and websites like Reddit, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast app of choice. All of this does really help us so much. But like I said, this podcast would not be possible without the patrons directly providing predictable and reliable support every month. And so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher supported levels:
Brad Medlin, Drita Foles, Zeechis, Daniel D, Aaron Close, Jan Rano, Deeks, Nicholas Buckner, Daniel High, GZ Ziggy, MJB1, HardForum.com, SNES Chalmers, Jerome Ferriero, Valcom Alev, Jensen Wang, Gregory Sacker, Sarcastro, Evan Dingle, Chris Rich, Compressed Earthflux, Reader SPO8, Hal Buma, Shredbird, Toka, Greg Wanchik, Holden Mobley, Sammy Malas, Benjamin Cannon, Jonathan, Jordan Simkovic, Julian Leak, The Boss Haas, Blake, Franco Frederic, Jake Martin, Jake Dude 23, Slicky, Stephen Hart, Meat and Pork, Tim Robb, Ian Clifford, Chrysantine, Travis Gooding, Christopher A. Butler, Mad, Zoot Suit Taylor, Stephen Coates, Neithra Zink, Michael McGee, Greg, Patty Cakes, Amiable Chief, Tommy, Mark Mitchell, I Should, Mark Raidmaker, James Anderson, Cole Addict, Judson N, Cameron, Wesley Sager, Henry Zhang, Michelle Pell, D31337 Antics, Hexapuma, Reginald Ari, Teak Autumn, Jamie Witters, Jeff Settler, Loophole 35, Windstar, JSMH, James I, Raider, Corey Leonard, Little Germany, Shay, Milton, Pulse Media, Melodic Warrior, Dave Schultz, Mac Daffy, RNDR, Stephen Dick, Chuck Glidden, Brett Jones, Mai Sharona, Austin Haggerty, Justin Bustle, Joe Foot, Brian Scanlon, Winwang, Hardlin, Slushpaw, Jansen, and Gima, Joseph Kelly, Himsa Gung, Tails 2299, Mio Valverga, John Sisyphos 7771, The Forbidden Juice, RB Racer, AC Brian Wright, Michael Cozy, Dr. J Mad, Alex Vega, Free D, John Swin, Joe La Martina, Kikum, Albert Gunn, Solarized 80, Matthew Marlowe, Tim Unveiled, Hudat 42, Penta Winta, Rowan McKicky, Cornstir 671, Sprutnik, Jeffrey, Gentleman, Angel of Cake, Omega Doge, John Wick Boomstick, Nick Sizmania, Curry King 3, Zombie Killer 777, and Porcelain Oats. And of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.